24. The Kindergarten. Model for a New Eden. When Emma Marwadell, 1818 to 1893, pioneer of the kindergarten in California, lay dying in a German hospital in San Francisco, she implored former pupils who came to visit her to hold fast to Froebel's teaching and to the ideal of the kindergarten. Her last words to one group were urgent. Have faith in the kindergarten, strive to represent Froebel in his essence. I believe in the power of the kindergarten to reform the world. For Miss Marwadell, the kindergarten was the means for the regeneration of the human race. According to Earl Barnes, who knew her, she was the typical educational reformer and about equally interested in the details of kindergarten education and in schemes of world regeneration through education. Miss Marwadell spoke with passion of the role of the child. The child's first mission opens with its helplessness, which is its great silent claim to be saved from the evils under which it is born and from which it suffers while passing through life. The child is man's civilizer, purifier, and redeemer. On this, the educator Swift commented, Few educational reformers have stated more convincingly the social and racial importance of the child. The kindergarten, thus, was born into an exalted role. It was to be the child's garden through which the worldwide Garden of Eden, paradise remade, was to be established. Its champions took their role very seriously. Horace Mann's sister-in-law, Elizabeth P. Peabody, one of the two great figures in American kindergarten history, in her lectures on Froebel and the kindergarten, underlined the fact that, I feel, as it were, divinely authorized to present him to you as an authority which you can reverently trust, and so be delivered from the uncertainties of your own narrow and crude notions, inexperienced and ignorant as you undoubtedly are, however talented. For her, the child is a seer blessed, whose teaching must be in terms of its trailing clouds of glory from God, God being here pantheistically defined as one in substance with the deepest consciousness of self, and hence to be gently cultivated and by no means drilled. Kindergartening is true education. More than that, it is a religion, not an avocation, but evocation from on high. It is the means to the true millennium. Childhood understood, leading in the promised millennium of peace on earth and goodwill among men, will make mankind forget the Babel confusion of its first experimenting and enter into the mutual understanding of the Pentecostal miracle. Basic to this goal is its means, love, as she stated it with all her typographical eloquence. Love, when it is understood, is irresistible. The child must be made to surrender its alien selfishness and blossom into its truly good nature under love. Under such a kindergarten regime, great wonders will be wrought, even to the curing of colour blindness. The hopes of men for the kindergarten movements were thus clearly optimistic. It was intended to be, in the words of the title of one manual, the paradise of childhood. The fountainhead of all this, Friedrich Froebel, 1782 to 1852, well before Darwin, not only held to cosmic evolution, but saw education as a major element in that continuing process. For Froebel, the entire universe was a living, evolving organism, the unity of which is called God. Its evolution is possible because of the law of activity, the law of action, reaction, and equilibrium, a broader application of the intellectual principle of process, that is, thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. This process has come to self-consciousness in man. Thus, man, who is evolving to a higher order of being, can guide that process through education. Evil is faulty education which interferes with the fundamental nature and direction of the cosmic process. The individual repeats his racial development, the culture epoch theory in education, the recapitulation theory in biology, but as a self-generating force by virtue of his participation in the absolute. Man's growth is not merely imitative, but creative. Hence, self-expression is necessary to growth and to self-realization. Thus, Froebel markedly advanced as well as clearly formulated the fundamental thesis of modern education: learning by living and learning by play. For Froebel, play was basic to education and essential to the development of the group spirits and group unity he so greatly desired. Every town should have its own common playground for the boys. Glorious results would come from this for the entire community. For at this period, games, whenever it is feasible, are common, and thus develop the feeling and desire for community and the laws and requirements for community. For Froebel, the child, through play, is working out his own education. This play needs the guidance of knowing educators to reach its true goal. As a result, education becomes guided living in play. The true teacher stands back and allows, through proper guidance, the potentialities of the child to come forth. For the purpose of teaching and instruction is to bring ever more out of man rather than to put more and more into him. For that which can get into man, we already know and possess as the property of mankind, and everyone, simply because he is a human being, will unfold and develop it out of himself in accordance with the laws of mankind. On the other hand, what yet is to come out of mankind, what human nature is yet to develop, that we do not yet know, that is not yet the property of mankind, and still human nature, like the Spirit of God, is ever unfolding its inner essence. Here is one of the typical myths of modern man nakedly stated. Culture and civilization are biological products which are now permanent data of man's nature. As Ortega y Gasset said of the modern specialist and barbarism, he also believes that civilization is there in just the way as the earth's crust and the forest primeval. Culture and civilization for Froebel were there, even as man's hands and feet are his natural properties. Thus, the educator can desert culture and civilization in the confidence that it cannot desert him. He presses on, instead of dealing with permanently conquered and developed areas, to bring new properties of man into being, to discover, through applied evolution, the true involution of man. In short, to evolve what is involved rather than to remain at his present stage. But since what is to be brought out is what the state educators first believe is there, this doctrine involved not a respect for the child's nature or for cultural inheritance, but rather an insistence on a new doctrine of man and the recreation of child, state, and school in terms of it. Since each individual is an aspect of that fundamental unity, the absolute, his true development is into unity with other men. Hence, education is in large measure social activity. Since for Froebel, play constituted the truest expression of the inner and true nature of man, play is basic to and the means of educating children. As a result, Froebel was insistent on the centrality of activity and play, not only to the kindergarten, but to elementary education in general. Since the absolute best expresses itself in man impulsively and instinctively, it follows that symbolism rather than learning dominates true education. Accordingly, Froebel developed his doctrine of correspondences, whereby various natural forms are manifestations of eternal truths, because mind and nature are parallel manifestations of God. As a result, every form in nature has, as its very essence, a symbolic meaning. The main principles, it will be remembered, whose applications from Froebel's system are self-activity to produce development, all-sided connectedness and unbroken continuity to help the right acquisition of knowledge, creativeness or expressive activity to produce assimilation of knowledge, growth of power and acquisition of skill, well-ordered physical activity to develop the physical body and its powers, and happy and harmonious surroundings to foster and help all these. If a school therefore includes amongst its aims the true acquisition of knowledge as distinct from the more or less temporary possession of information, and with this the development of power and the production of skill, and most schools at least profess to do so, it follows at once that the school must look to these same principles for continued guidance and help, unless it denies their efficacy altogether or holds that the life of a human being is a series of discontinuous, separate existences, the natural laws of which differ for each successive existence. These words of a dedicated disciple of Froebel, H.C. Bowen, first a headmaster and then university lecturer at Cambridge on the theory of education, give us the fundamentals of what later came to be known as progressive education. The separation of true knowledge from mere learning and information was an emphatic note. True knowledge is a mystical social experience for this school of educators. The mystical aspect was very prominent in Froebel, as Butts has observed. The handling of a ball or sphere was somehow supposed to give the child a sense of the perfect unity of all things, and sitting in a circle was supposed to make him feel his identification as an individual with his social group, and eventually with the unity of all mankind in the absolute. For Froebel, every life form was a mystical pointer to quote-unquote God, the unity of being. The things of nature form a more beautiful ladder between heaven and earth than that seen by Jacob, not a one-sided ladder leading in one direction, but an all-sided one leading in all directions. Man is in essential unity with all things because everything is a manifestation of divine being, and this apprehension is basic to his education and religion. Every form of nature is thus a witness to that unity. So man, even when a child, by games with the ball, is placed in the centre of his own life and of all life. The development of this experience led to total identification with all being and mystical love of all, so that the dying Froebel could say, "I love flowers, men, children, God, I love everything." Because of this mysticism, Emma Marwadell held that the ideal schoolhouse would be a circular building. Froebel's rationale for this symbolism was both his view of the continuity of being and his radical empiricism, things having a primacy to words, and hence experiences having a primacy to information and book learning and education. As Froebel stated it, "The ABC of things must precede the ABC of words and give to the words, abstractions, their true foundations. It is because these foundations fail so often in the present time that there are so few men who think independently and express skillfully their inborn divine ideas. Perception is the beginning and the preliminary condition for thinking. One's own perceptions awaken one's own conceptions, and these awaken one's own thinking in later stages of development. Let us have no precocity, but natural, that is, consecutive development. The correct perception is a preparation for correct thinking and knowing." Later followers of Froebel, such as Dewey, dropped the symbolism, but by retaining the concept of continuity, retained the emphasis on socializing the child, and by retaining the empiricism, retained the primacy of experience in education. Thus, social experience constitutes the core of true education for Froebel and for all his successors to the present. Froebel's kindergarten gifts were these basic symbolic forms whose experience opened up reality for the child. The ball or sphere is a symbol of the one and of unity, whereas the cube symbolizes variety or manifoldness in unity, so that, by these two symbols, The great principles of the one and many and their inseparable unity are set forth. The other quote-unquote gifts or forms had like mystical meanings. Another fundamental principle of Froebel's educational philosophy was aimed against the Christian doctrine of original sin. As Froebel expressed it himself in his mother songs, the soft and pure child was to teach its mother the truth and purity of life. Dear little children, we will learn from you, gardens will make, and you the flowers shall be. Our care shall seem no tedious drudgery, only a happy trust that's ever new. We'll guard you from the great world's strife and din, but our chiefest, gladdest care shall be to give you your own selves, to help you see the meaning of each opening power within. O blessed thoughts that God to us has given, the finishing of that which He has planned. And as we help your young souls to expand, our own, in the sweet task, shall grow toward heaven. Behind this ecstasy stands certain self-assured claims. First, the child is naturally good and pure, as against the doctrine of original sin. Second, the absolute, the pantheistic God or unity of all being, has turned over the government and shaping of these children to these enlightened new educators and to their agencies, later increasingly identified with the democratic state. Third, these educators will give to children their true selves, whereas others would ostensibly rob them of it. The child's kindergarten play must be used to reveal the true symbols of nature. Thus, the familiar nursery game Pat-a-Cake truly means that there is a great chain of life and service and human interdependence. Hide-and-seek reveals that the goal of life is unity. The yearning for estrangement merely points to the path by which unity may be attained. Thus, long before Jung, Froebel saw symbols and activities as expressions of a racial unconscious, which in turn reflected the essential forms of the absolute. The children were to learn the basic unity of all things and restore that unity by love, so that children reared on the flower song would learn to exclaim, "O Mother, the plants and flowers love us just as you do." The effect of play, therefore, play in terms of true kindergarten principles, is blessedness. The goal of this kind of education is the perfect man. For Froebel and his followers, the destiny of nations lay in the hands of women as they apply these principles and follow Froebel's mother play. The kindergarten Bible, which must be studied. The result of such application would be world history begun anew. The purpose of the kindergarten is, in terms of this, to develop the spiritual nature of the child and prepare him for ideal citizenship. As they dedicate themselves to this task, women will find that, like St. Christopher, we have borne the Christ upon our shoulders. The kindergarten movement, thus, by its own avowed declaration, proclaims a new gospel. It is education by development of the potentialities of the holy child, and is thus something more fundamental than instruction in the 3 R's. This principle holds good for all education. That education is a process of development rather than a process of instruction, that play is the natural means of development during the early years, that the child's creative activity must be the main factor in his education, and that his present interests and needs rather than the demands of the future should determine the material and method to be employed. All these principles underlying kindergarten procedure the psychologist approved, not for kindergarten alone, but for all education. These principles of the kindergarten have steadily prevailed and reached up through the elementary and secondary school into the college and university. Long before progressive education was formally born, it existed in kindergarten theory. Since man was, in essence, good, and education is a natural process of unfolding his spiritual capacities in accordance with the universal laws of evolution, it follows that education is not only permissive in nature, but that it is the unfolding of the new democratic God in all his glory. The pervasive influence of the kindergarten is seldom appreciated. It already infected every church in Western Europe and America and was carried by them into missionary practice the world over, into church schools and parental training. The Women's Christian Temperance Union championed it widely. Later, Russia made it basic to its statist education, starting full school day kindergartens for children at the age of 3 and nursery schools for younger children. G. Stanley Hall, John Dewey, and others in large measure expanded and developed the fundamental principles of the new kindergarten movement in terms of a worldview. In a new and radically alien sense, it was held that a little child should lead humanity to a new paradise. Unhappily, instead of being the beginnings of a new Garden of Eden, the kindergarten, by its induction of the young into a radically false concept of life, has come closer to being a child's garden of neurosis. Moreover, while the symbolism of Froebel receded, his emphasis on evolution and his anti-intellectualism increased in subsequent theory. According to the doctrine of evolution, man's emotional and instinctual responses have a priority to his intellectual activities, preceding them in development, and hence are more basic to man. Truly basic education is thus, in terms of this basic nature of man, hence the emphasis on play, activity, physical education, art, music, and the like. As Frederick Burke stated it, so far as neurological data gives evidence, the order of development is ever from those structures which are oldest in the race towards those which are the most recent. Thus, this is both basic and scientific education. There was, of course, resistance to it from many first-grade teachers. First-grade teachers confide to their superintendents that they would prefer children who have not attended the kindergarten to those who have. They fail to find any product in the kindergarten training of which the school can make use, and, on the other hand, they whisper that the kindergarten children are unruly, lack a spirit of obedience, are dependent, and continually expect to be amused. It may be, of course, that the primary school teacher does not know a good thing when she sees it, but the upshot of the matter is that the kindergarten is having a hard time of it in establishing its place in the educational system. The least we can say is that the school and the kindergarten are out of joint. These whispered complaints, however, were futile. By and large, the kindergarten was immensely popular, both with educators and parents. Indeed, prominent personages and politicians in Washington, D.C. early took the lead in giving both their children and their approval to the new gospel of childhood. In later years, educators pitting the holdout children against the kindergartners were able to find scientific evidence to prove the slight superiority of the kindergarten-trained children to these others. This superiority applied to the early grades, indicating that the kindergarten children had better learned to deliver what was expected of them. The kindergarten ably caught the spirit of the age and uttered its truisms with telling effectiveness. Thus, when Catherine Beebe declared the necessity of self-expression, we must admit that it is absolutely essential to the growth of body, mind, and soul. It had the ring of infallible and necessary truth. All else must be eliminated to give this overriding concept free play. Not what the child learned from wiser heads, but what the child, this new fount of wisdom, expressed was the hope of the future. Play, from Froebel on, was the means to this wisdom. In play, the child sought not mere amusement, but to give expression to basic and important impulses arising out of the vast racial and personal unconscious mind. And, as Froebel has stated it, unconsciousness is raised to consciousness chiefly by action. This cause was carried forward by many dedicated champions, including William Torrey Harris, Colonel Francis W. Parker, Frederick Burke, John Dewey, Maria Montessori, and many others. Montessori strongly emphasized the social aspect of the school, and Dewey added to the growing philosophy the faith that The present, as well as the future, is of importance to the child. Education is not all preparation for what is to come, but it is also the enriching and interpreting of the experiences of the present. The purpose of the kindergarten has thus remained basically the same through the years. The addition of reading to the program does not alter its basic nature, which is education by means of activity and experience. This philosophy is characteristic of this school as a whole and not of the kindergarten only. This philosophy was well summarized some years ago by Ada Vanstone Harris, supervisor of kindergarten and primary education, Rochester, New York. The kindergarten offers the child experience instead of instruction, life instead of learning, a miniature world where he lives, grows, expands, and learns. Nina C. Vanderwalker measured the success of the kindergarten by the application of its principles to all grades. These guiding principles are self-activity, experience as a means of self-discovery, and self-revelation. All education made relative to the society in which it is given, generalizations based on evolutionary theory and belief in the importance and organic unity of experience. The essence of education is thus activity in terms of the child's self-expression and social adjustment. The kindergarten is thus education by activity. This activity is itself learning. We learn through experience. Learning by doing is the essence of the program. Learning by studying and by means of books is somehow either reprehensible or, at best, secondary. An activity program is a problem-solving approach and is thus apparently more scientific. The kindergarten is usually a child's first introduction to a large social group and is therefore of tremendous importance in meeting social emotional needs. The teacher must thus remember that she is a guide and leader of children rather than a teacher of specific facts. The truisms which kindergartners remind us of, as though they alone are aware of them, are sometimes startling. We are assured that kindergarten children are human beings, as they have been since birth, and will continue to be until death. After this profound bit of wisdom, we are warned, they have a right to the privileges and responsibilities which come with membership in a democratic society. But are children only human when the world is turned into a child's paradise and an adult's hell? Is the child truly human to kindergartners who divinize him? Are not the tantrums of this new God more reminiscent of the old devil? But since the aim of education is now self-realization, external standards have no place. The self-expressing individual and a society designed for the social unity of such individuals is the essence of education. The kindergarten is preeminently an ethical institution because it is a social setting, and ethics today is thoroughly social in reference. Therefore, education is an interactionary process of assimilation and adjustment. J.B. Watson's behaviorism furthered the anti-intellectualism of education and aided kindergarten theory. Man, being a social being, his truest learning is in terms of the group. Hence, socializing the class is a kindergarten procedure and goal. For old-fashioned people complaining about the results, educators had answers most satisfying to themselves. Asked if a room was too noisy, another supervisor replied, "Are you judging by the noise inherent in the situation or by your inherited prejudices? How many of us have prejudices to overcome?" And in this day and age, to accuse anyone of prejudice is assumed to be sufficiently crushing. The nursery school began together with the kindergarten and was championed as necessary for mental hygiene. Children apparently need such mental hygiene to recuperate from their families. The nursery school from the beginning has been especially popular, not only with working mothers but with intellectuals and pediatricians. According to the high priestesses of the kindergarten cult, to further mental hygiene, a new literature is needed for children. Realistic, here and now stories. The kindergarten, although play, is serious business, and as a curriculum which is social science. After all, a large part of kindergarten experience has to do with learning to live happily, comfortably, and constructively with other people. Thus is perhaps the most important thing that the child learns in kindergarten. The cult of the child has exalted the kindergarten into a position whereby it has undercut and devalued the great Christian rites of baptism and confirmation. Their great function, entrance into the covenant and culture of God's church and people, has given way to a new rite, the first day at kindergarten, which is a divorce from family and past. The comparison to rites is not a hostile or critical one. Indeed, in a handbook for parents of prospective kindergarten children, Part 1 is titled Initiation Rites. While study may be out for most little children, it is the order of the day for some parents. Many kindergartens have a study group for parents. At these meetings, the parents not only study the meaning of the child, but repair toys, paint furniture, and become involved in greater community activities. The family can no longer see itself as the central institution. Family life and activity must give way to greater things. The dying Emma Marwadell said, "I believe in the power of the kindergarten to reform the world." To a large measure, the Western world in particular has been reformed in the original sense of that word, reshaped, but Miss Marwadell to the contrary, it has not been regenerated. The kindergarten model for a new Garden of Eden has better reflected the fall of man and paradise. In the modern school, play and learn are different aspects of the same situation, each one a natural supplement to the other. Some Romans once charged that Nero played while Rome burned. In terms of the coming conflagration that world events increasingly promise, educators have thoughtfully taken pains that we do not lack our Neros. The main responsibility, however, cannot be ascribed to educators, but must be firmly laid at the door of parents, mothers in particular. In spite of all the honours and high praise accorded them, more than a few of the earnest pioneers of the kindergarten movement had more than a slight air of absurdity in the eyes of their contemporaries. Indeed, one of the most dedicated of these women was sometimes seen as amusing by uncouth kindergarten pupils. Certainly, neither mothers nor prominent personages were deceived in this manner. Why, then, did the kindergarten succeed? The answer was and is clear-cut. The desire of women to get rid of their children. Educators have had to set an age requirement for kindergarten children, else they would be deluged with mothers trying to push very young children into their hands. Thus, kindergarten has proven to be, in part, a polite and oblique form of infanticide, one which hypocritical women can indulge in while getting credit for solicitous motherhood. The kindergarten movement was born out of a romantic and idealistic philosophy and its idealization of the child. It prospered because women, drinking the heady wine of feminism, had come to regard womanhood and motherhood as burdensome and lacked the honesty to say so. The nursery school and the kindergarten were thus admirable and respectable escapes from responsibility. What health there is in the kindergarten has come not from the educational philosophers, but from loving and healthy-minded teachers. These women, oblivious of theory and curriculum, have taken shy children, awed by the world of learning, gently in hand and led them toward the world of books. The introduction in some areas lately of reading into the kindergarten has been, in a measure, the formal adoption of informal practice.